We continue with theory of income determination. We will study one more aspect this time. We have seen in our earlier study what happens when aggregate demand is not equal to aggregate supply. Now we go a step further. We will study what will happen when aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply at full employment. There is a difference between the two studies. In one study earlier, we only talked about aggregate demand not being equal to aggregate supply. Here we are talking of aggregate demand not being equal to aggregate supply at full employment level of income. The question may arise, what is the need of this study? Although you may not get a question on this in your class 12 exam, but you must understand the need for it. Full employment is the goal of every society, and full employment equilibrium naturally becomes goal of every society. What will happen if full employment is achieved but equilibrium is not achieved? That is, aggregate demand is not equal to aggregate supply. I hope you understand the importance of this question. Full employment is achieved, but equilibrium is not achieved, because equilibrium will be achieved only when aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Two situations are possible. At full employment level, aggregate demand being greater than aggregate supply, one situation. Another situation, aggregate demand being less than aggregate supply at full employment level. The two situations are termed as excess demand and deficient demand. So excess demand refers to AD greater than AS at full employment. Level of income. In the exams, when we get this question, normally students have a tendency to skip the second part, that is full employment level. Now this excess of AD over AS is called excess demand. Now coming back to microeconomic theory, what will happen in the market if demand is greater than supply? The answer is clear. Prices will rise. When demand is greater than supply, prices will rise. What will happen when throughout the country aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply? When all are employed, what will happen? The end result would be price level in the country will rise. There will be inflation. You may not get a question on this, but you must understand there will be inflation. Why will this be? We need not discuss at this stage. That you will learn at the university level. This is why excess demand, which is nothing but gap between AD and AS, is also called inflationary gap. Why it is called inflationary gap? We have just given you the reason. Because this leads to rise in the price level in the country. This is why it is called inflationary gap. We can represent this on a diagram also. You are familiar with AD is equal to AS equilibrium. We will draw a diagram on that basis. 45-degree line now you must have income on the x-axis and AD on the y-axis. We draw AD curve. This is equilibrium. So far we have not stated excess demand situation. We have simply given the equilibrium situation. Now, we have defined excess demand when at full employment AD is greater than AS. This is our equilibrium level. Let this be full employment level. Because only at any level before this AD will be greater than AS. So if we want to show excess demand on a diagram, we must take the point left to the equilibrium point. For example, F. F here refers to full employment. Now at this, what do we find? We find that aggregate supply is OF. This aggregate supply will be equal to aggregate demand at this point. इस पॉइंट पर ये दोनों बराबर होंगे. अगर एग्रीगेट डिमांड इतना ही होता तो there was no problem. But our aggregate demand is higher. It is higher by this much. Let us call it AB. This AB, the gap between AD and AS. This AB is nothing but inflationary gap. Inflationary gap, this much. This is how we can show it on the diagram. Keep in mind, if we want to show inflationary gap, it must be to the left of the equilibrium. Equilibrium is at M. Any point to the left of M will show inflationary gap. Once you have understood the concept of inflationary gap, now we can take up in concept of deficient demand. It is defined in the same way. Now AD less than AS at full employment. Level of income. Aggregate demand less than aggregate supply. Let me remind, while defining excess demand or deficient demand, it is necessary to mention full employment along with. Implications.